Chairman Bennett, good afternoon.
Yeah. Now, how are you?
Hey, I can hear you. Good. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm filling in for Natalie. She's at another meeting. Hopefully you heard about that. So I'll be around.
Okay. Remind me, you will read then in her place the preparatory remarks?
Yeah, I have the little coma statement.
Okay. Well, we'll get started here in 3 or 4 minutes.
Sounds good.
Afternoon, Mark.
Howdy. How we doing?
Pretty good. It's definitely a Monday.
It's hard to tell some days. They all seem like Mondays lately.
Yeah. Probably the brightest thing this week is I dropped my last one off at college Friday, and I'm an empty nester.
You got me beat. My oldest goes back tomorrow, but I still got 2 at home. We started late.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I know the totem pole at my house. It'll still be her, the dog, then me. Yep.
There you go.
Jeff, do you have a seal that big behind you, or is that generated? You're muted.
Is generated.
Okay. I was thinking, wow, that's a big old seal to have in your office.
I tell my staff, I wish I could find a bigger one. Not joking, but yeah. How are you, Chief? Good to see you.
Doing well.
All right. Well, we'll get started here in about a minute. Just looking for my number of folks here for a roll call.
Mark, this is Jordan from KLRD. I'm happy to call roll if you'd like me to.
That would be fantastic. All right. It is 1:31, so I'm hoping everybody who wants to be on is on. I think the first order of business is I'll turn it over and have the preparatory remarks read by Jason.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Bennett. This is Jason Thompson with the Office of Revisor of Statutes. And due to health and safety concerns, members of the public are not in attendance at this meeting, but full access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication, allowing members of the public without cost to listen to the meeting through the use of live stream and audio broadcasting on the internet and teleconference as available. Information on how to access this meeting was sent out with the notice for this meeting. The The agenda for this meeting was included with the notice of the meeting and may be requested from the Office of Revisor of Statutes using the Office of Revisor of Statutes official website at ks.revisor.org. Any other documents presented during this meeting will be available on the website and from the Office of Revisor of Statutes. Each member of the commission and staff will state their name and title each time the individual begins speaking or voting so that the individual can be readily identified by remote listeners. All participants are required to ensure that microphones, phones, or other electronic devices are muted when the participants are not speaking so that the ability of remote listeners or observers to hear the proceedings is not unnecessarily impeded. Public comment will not be allowed at this meeting. During this meeting, the commission will not recess to a closed or executive meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319 and amendments thereto. And finally, each motion, if any, will be clearly stated before the commission votes, and the chairperson will announce the results of the final vote. Thank you, Chairperson Bennett.
Thank you. And Jordan, if you would, go ahead and call roll for, everybody to see who's in attendance. And again, everybody state your name so that the listeners can hear who's on. Mark Bennett, Commissioner of the committee, or Chairman of the commission, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. This is Jordan Milholland again with KLRD. I'll go ahead and start calling roll. So as you know, Mark Bennett's here. Is Representative Owens here?
I am here present.
Thank you, Representative Owens. Is Senator Haley here? Haven't seen
Jordan, this is Martin with KLR.
Senator Wilborn. Okay, Representative Finney.
Present.
Thank you, Representative. Chief Ackerman.
Present.
Thanks, Chief. Jennifer Basinger. Judge Brown. Sheriff Carr.
Present.
Thanks, Sheriff. Judge Clark.
Present.
Thank you. Professor Francis.
Present.
Thanks. Chad Harmon.
Present.
Thanks, Chad. Spence Cohen.
Present.
Thank you. Tabitha Owen. Sylvia Penner.
Present.
Thanks, Sylvia. Bill Persinger. Professor Phillips.
Present.
Thanks, Professor. Pastor Robertson. Shelley Williams.
Here.
Thanks, Shelley. Reggie Robinson. General Schmidt. I believe I saw Jessica Domian for General Schmidt. Is that correct?
Correct. Jessica Domi on behalf of Attorney General Schmidt.
Thank you. And then I believe we also have Chris Lyons sitting in for Executive Director Scott Schultz of the Sentencing Commission.
That's correct. Chris Lyon for Scott Schultz.
Thanks, Chris. Secretary Zmuda.
I'm here.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. Connie Bonner. I believe she's on. I see her on the call here. Bob Gallimore from KLRD.
I'm here, Jordan.
Thanks, Bob. Malaysia Shagun from KLRD.
Present. Thank you, Jordan.
Jason Thompson from the Revisor's Office.
Present.
And then I believe Natalie Scott and Jenna Moyer from the Revisor's Office are they're in another meeting this afternoon as well. And then I also see Patrick Armstrong on the call from CSG.
Present.
Thanks, Patrick. Is there anyone else I've missed?
Hey, this is Bill Persinger from Vallejo up in Topeka. Just signed on. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Is there anyone else that I might have missed? Okay, I believe that covers it.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. This is again Chairman Bennett of the Commission. Jordan, while I have you on, remind me, if I've seen minutes from the last meeting to approve for today. I've overlooked it. Do we have any minutes that have been circulated that need approval?
Thanks, Mark. I believe that we sent out minutes from the July 13th and the June 8th meetings. We sent those out last week.
I must have looked right over them. I apologize for that. Open it up for discussion as to the minutes. Everybody who's had a chance to review them. Any discussion regarding the minutes, any changes, modifications, etc.
Chairman, I'd offer a motion to approve both sets.
Second.
Bill, that's Bill Persinger made the motion and Chief Ackerman seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll have, I think on a roll call vote like this, Jordan, if you would again go through I think we're supposed to do a roll call officially instead of just a yay or nay with unnamed voices. So my vote is to approve.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Representative Owens.
Aye.
Senator Haley joined us yet? Senator Wilborn. Representative Finney.
Aye.
Chief Ackerman.
Aye.
Jennifer Basinger. I believe she was absent. Judge Brown. Sheriff Carr.
Aye.
Judge Clark.
Aye.
Professor Francis.
Aye.
Chad Harmon.
Aye.
Spence Cohen.
Aye.
Tabitha Owen. Sylvia Pinner.
Aye.
Bill Persinger.
Aye.
Professor Phillips.
Aye.
Pastor Robertson. Shelley Williams.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'll turn it back over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Jordan. All right. I think the next thing is we go up with updates from the various subcommittees. Spence, I know you're on the call, and I think, again, no particular order. The first one on the agenda was Diversion, Specialty Courts, Specialty Prisons, Supervision Subcommittee. If you could give an update.
Yes, thank you. So we continue to meet monthly. Our last meeting was last Wednesday on August 5th. All of our work groups continue to move forward. We're beginning to, well, I've asked that all the work groups have recommendations, if possible, submitted to me by the 24th of September so that our full subcommittee could review those before passing those on to you. Hopefully we get most of those to you by the October 12th that you've requested. But other than that, we continue to move forward, and I'm going to ask, like I have every other time, just that each chairperson of the work groups that we have give a brief update. And I'll start with you, Mr. Chairman, if you would give an update on the diversion work group.
Yeah, I've actually sent out an email this morning to the members of this working group. Since being taken over that role about a month ago, been reading minutes and some reports, documents that have been circulated, and reading through some of the issues that were identified last fall within that working group, and sent out an email. We're trying to get a meeting scheduled either this Friday afternoon late or maybe sometime early next week, and go through and identify what kind of issues we can actually come to some consensus on in terms of making specific recommendations, probably statutory recommendations to the subcommittee within the time frame that you've asked for by September 24th, so that we can get it. So we have a robust conversation among the commission members in October, November. So that's what's happening next, and hopefully we'll meet here within the week, maybe sometime in the next 5 to 6 working days. And I think I've got a fairly good idea, at least where the working group was headed. before I was asked to take over. So thank you.
Does anybody have questions? Thanks again for being willing to, in your busy schedule, to take over that the chairperson of that work group as well. I know that just adds to your workload, so I appreciate it. Judge Brown, I don't believe, or Tabitha, she gave our update for the specialty courts. Is anybody else here on that work group?
I know Judge Brown had a funeral to attend today, so.
Okay, all right. Thank you. So they had not met as well. They're continuing to, I believe they are working with some people at OJA and been getting feedback for that. So that's about the report for the specialty courts. I know at our last meeting someone had asked if there was anything about funding that they've looked into, and at this point they haven't, but that might also be something that they try to get some information on. So that's a report from the specialty courts. Secretary Zamuda, would you give an update like you provided to us on the specialty prisons?
I would. This is Jeff Zamuda, Secretary of Corrections. So we had 2 projects that were funded, part in this fiscal year and this past fiscal year and the current fiscal year, and they were converting buildings at 2 different sites for the purpose of specialty beds at our Winfield facility. Adjacent to that, there are 2 buildings currently that fall under the Commission on Veterans Affairs. And we'd made a proposal to convert those 2 buildings to beds for the geriatric and some cognitive care beds for our older population. And then a portion of those would be for drug and alcohol treatment beds. And then another project was over at the Lansing facility, and it was buildings that were closed with the reconstructed facility that was brought online this spring, and taking one of those buildings and renovating it and turning that into 200 substance abuse treatment beds. While the funding remains in our budget for both those projects, given the state of the economy and with COVID, there is a chance that some of that funding could be reduced in the future. We're going to start by focusing on one project over the other, and that would be the project at Winfield, which is for the geriatric and the cognitive care and the drug and alcohol treatment at that facility. We're in the process of having that site surveyed and transferring the title from the Commission on Veterans Affairs to the DOC. And the next step would be to get a set of drawings done and then proceed from there. That's pretty much where we're at today.
Thank you. Anybody have questions? Okay. Oh, no, I apologize. I think I failed to state that I'm Spence Cohen previously. So Shelley Williams with the Supervision Work Group.
Sure. Thanks, Spence. Shelley Williams, Riley County Community Corrections. And we have the final version of the Community Supervision Assessment Plan from CSG. And they are going to begin by assessing areas of the state with the highest population of offenders supervised. So that includes Sedgwick, Johnson, Wyandotte, Shawnee, Saline, and Reno. And they're going to be doing policy reviews, one-on-one interviews, and group interviews. And then they're going to move to assess agencies based on geographic representation statewide. And they tried to align the geographic ones where all of the 3 supervision entities, so court services, community corrections, and parole, were reasonably close to each other. So those include Atchison, Hiawatha, Pittsburgh, Junction City, Manhattan, Hayes, and Garden City. And they're hoping to get multiple layers of perspective from the supervision entities to include clients, line staff, mid-management, and management. The work group helped gather and provide all of the contact information for all of the 3 supervision entities, not just the ones that are going to be assessed, but the ones, all of them for all 3 supervision entities. We're continuing as a work group to receive surveys back. We sent out survey via SurveyMonkey on employment and housing opportunities for offenders to each entity. And we are still gathering that information as we speak. We are continuing to review other states' policies that pertain to supervision and then reporting back to the group and seeing what kind of issues or concerns and hopefully eventually consensus around some of those policies to be able to recommend to this larger group at a later date. We requested on Friday, and I already have a third of Community Corrections Agency's conditions of probation back. And just waiting to get those back, and CSG will be compiling those just to kind of see what kind of conditions of probation that exist in the state of Kansas, to include the special conditions of supervision as well. And I think that is it. We are meeting weekly because it is a pretty big entity, the 3 entities to tackle. And so we do meet on a weekly basis. And I think that's it, Spence.
Thank you. Anybody have questions for Shelley?
Sheriff Carr.
Nope. Go ahead, Sheriff.
I'd like to comment to the commission being involved in many of the discussions that Shelley and has entertained here. This is a very, very strong, hardworking group. As Shelley said, they've branched out in several areas. There's a lot of work going on. So I want to commend you for what you're doing, the hard work that you and the staff have been putting into this. I know I'm having a hard time keeping up with the meetings. I think I'm in competition with Patrick and Greg Halls. So, but with that, Shelley, I do have a question. Reading the minutes on your SurveyMonkey on the last one you did on the housing and employment, did you all determine how you planned on moving forward with trying to rectify some of the voids and the responses?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Sheriff Carr, for your kind words. There were a lot of missing data elements within the SurveyMonkey. It was a big, complex survey. And so I'm actually meeting with Brian Seidler from Johnson County Community Corrections, who is kind of our data analyst, if you will, this afternoon at 3. And we are going to send it back out with stronger instructions and to kind of address maybe why, some of those cells were left empty. So we're going to give it another go around and have a deadline of 1 week from today. So we're going to give it one more try and see if we can get some better data. So thank you.
I just want to comment again, this is Sheriff Carr. If those of you aren't aware, they sent out 63 surveys and received 59 back. So that's good in and of itself. However, with having a lot of the questions unanswered, and there were a lot of assumptions being made on the committee's behalf as to why maybe the voids and not answering some of the questions. So I think if, as Shelley said, if they send that back out, it'll definitely help Patrick and his group in putting together a good report.
Thanks. So that's basically our report. I know Patrick and his group with Council of State Governments is working diligently with, I know with everybody, but they've really been involved, especially with the supervision work group. And they also gave their report to our group last week, and their work seems valuable. So thanks to Council State Governments also. Our next meeting will likely be September 21st, but we're still nailing down a date and time. So that's it for this work group or supervision subcommittee. Thanks.
Very good. Any other questions for Spence or members of that subcommittee? Seeing none, I'll move on to Mental Health Substance Abuse Subcommittee. Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stephen Owens, House Representative for the 74th House District and Chairman of the Mental Health Subcommittee. Mr. Chairman, we had the opportunity to meet this past July 24th. I had a very good meeting where we added a number of ex officio members. You might recall our subcommittee is a bit small and we lost Brenda Salvati when she retired. And so with that, we put out a call for additional members that were willing to help serve on our subcommittee. And so I'm pleased to announce that the following people have joined our subcommittee in an ex officio capacity. Barth Haig, he is with Mirror Inc. He's the CEO of Mirror, which is one of the state's state-sanctioned substance abuse treatment facilities. He's based out of Newton. There's Vicki Brose. She is out of Southwest Kansas, I believe Ford County, with Compass Mental Health. We also added Chad Harmon, who is a representative from the Kansas Sentencing Commission, along with Andrea Clark, who works with mental health related issues with the Kansas Department of Aging and Disability, as well as Jessica Lucas with Watkins Public Strategy. So we added a lot of great knowledge to our subcommittee, which makes the conversation even better, the decisions even better, and hopefully our recommendations even stronger going forward. So had a chance to get to know them a little bit. We also received a presentation from Patrick Armstrong, who's going to get a lot of accolades during this meeting because of the work that their organization has been tasked with to assist us in our various needs with the Criminal Justice Reform Commission. Specifically, we received some information from them as it relates to the adjustment reinvestment process here in Kansas and kind of what their primary focused goals are, which are 1, to make more effective use of corrections resources, including prison space. 2 is to strengthen community supervision by expanding resources to reduce behaviors that lead to violation revocations. 3, where they're going to help us a lot, is addressing behavioral health needs and to make people more successful upon release and in the community, and then build upon reentry efforts, successful employment and housing related items. So they provided us with a list of people in the behavioral health assessment that they're going to be interviewing and kind of a timeline that they're going to work with those folks, as well as on the housing plan. And truthfully, they're going to be a great asset, because I think if there's one thing our subcommittee has realized is that there's an enormous amount of information out there and a number of different committees and groups that have led the way in making recommendations. And so the Council of State Governments has is willing to bring all of that information together and to help us formulate a plan based on a number of other previous groups and committees and commissions that have worked over recent years. So very excited to have them on board, and thank Patrick and his team that will be working with us. In addition to that, Professor John Francis Assistant Bridget Markley provided us with a great overview of drug legislation reform. It was titled Reducing the Severity Levels of Possession Offenses. Bridget is a Washburn Law School student and did a great job. And I have a presentation which will be part of the permanent record that I would encourage everybody to take a look at. But one of a couple of pieces of information that stick out to myself personally, which I know kind of goes, we all sort of know this, but her nationwide numbers she provided really struck a chord with me. In 1980, almost 50,000 incarcerated for drug offenses. In 2013, that increased to 489,000. So we're talking about some significant increases in drug incarcerations. And she went on to talk about how employment was truly one of the key indicators linked to recidivism, and made some suggestions for us to consider moving forward as it relates to drug possessions and some of the collateral consequences as it related to felony convictions. So very great presentation, and I thank her and I thank Professor Francis for his willingness to allow her to do some of this work for us. She compared some of the states around us and what they were doing and provided very good information for us. So going forward, we're going to utilize the expertise on our group to continue to put together recommendations, to vet those, to work with the Council of State Governments on the information that they are gathering for us as well, to hopefully meet some of the fast approaching deadlines. So with that in mind, I will stand for questions.
Any questions for Representative Owens?
Chairman, this is Bill Persinger.
Yeah, go ahead.
Representative, great report. Thank you. And I just want to reference a May of 2020 KDAD's report called Mental Health in Jails. I think I sent that along, Representative, and if I didn't, please let me know.
You did send that.
Yeah, super. And it references a couple of three other really important pieces of work that I know that the representatives aware of, and some of the rest of you might be, and that's the legislative post audit about mental health and corrections. Dealt with a lot of local and state issues. And there is a mental health reform task force report. In fact, there are three, one on substance abuse, one for adults with mental illness, and another with children. And the one with children, relates to juvenile offenses as well. But there are several point is of all that, there's several source documents out there that I know Representative Owens is aware of, and I'm thinking that those will make great discussion points for when we can put our heads together and come up with a format in whatever plan that the subcommittee may choose. But most of this work's already been done. It's a matter of taking a look at the funding environment, the regulatory environment, getting the input from Patrick and his crew. So that's just all I wanted to add, Chairman Owens. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. You're absolutely right. I've started reading that document. It's a pretty big document, but it is a great report that is going to help us put forth some of those recommendations and work with Patrick's group. So thank you for sharing that with me.
And I think that report's actually, I'm not sure if it's annual, but there's several years worth of those going back. So you see not only last year's, but several look backs over the last 8 or 10 years, because I've seen a couple of those.
I'd forgotten that too, Chairman. Thank you for reminding me.
Representative Owens, I'd add one other thing here. As you're thinking about some of these collateral consequences for drug offenses, one thing that I know that I was going to bring up as part of the working group on diversion. It's not exactly on point, but might be germane to our discussions, might also be germane to yours, is the fact that Oklahoma, Texas, and several other regional states have what's called a deferred adjudication, which is not authorized under Kansas law currently. And that's how they handle a lot of the drug cases I know in Oklahoma. So anyway, my point is we're talking about potential legislation and ways to address some of these deficits. One of the things we need to talk about is, I think, at least have that consideration. That's never really been a part of the ongoing discussion. There's headaches that come with criminal history and other things. Like Missouri has something akin to it as well. But that is one avenue that other states around us have to address drug possession cases that we simply don't have on our books right now. So it's something I'd encourage you to look at.
Super. Thank you very much for sharing that. I wrote that down, and we'll do some research and reach out to you for some additional information.
Yeah, Steve, I've done a little, this is Bennett again, I've done some looking into myself. I'll send you what I've got.
Thank you.
Anything else for Representative Owens? Seeing none, I'll move on to Proportionality Sentencing Subcommittee, Chief Ackerman.
Thank you, Chief Ackerman. We met with the CSG and Patrick and his crew on July 23rd, and we went over, they did some research for us on the sentencing guidelines, and different states obviously do it different ways. Some have 2 grids like we have, some have 1, some have none. Then we asked the question, what if we would take the top 5 or 10 crimes and have them reworked in the legislature for sentencing, more than trying to change the entire grid. It's like we talked at the last meeting here, Mr. Bennett, I noticed that in our minutes last time of this very thing. And it sounds like that's the way we could go. But what we did is when we had our meeting August 7th for the proportionality, we created the questionnaire, and Scott Schultz and his is facilitating this through his employees there, his staff. It's going to go out this week to have the questions. There's only 6 questions that we're actually going to be asking. We started out with just 3 questions, ended up being 6. The first question is only, are you a judge, prosecutor, bids attorney, and such? And the second question is, would you support combining the current non-drug and drugs? Third, should the top 5 felonies in a state each grid set forth below have the monthly incarceration ranges reworked for proportionality, then we'd have to give them the top 5 of each. Then 4, would you support the drug possession crimes be classified as non-grid, much like DUI? We're talking level 5 here and above. We're not talking about distributions, stuff like that. Number 4, would you support removing mandatory minimums for certain misdemeanors? That's a different subject that came up. We had a presentation by the Douglas County DA Charles Branson about this. This is the first discussion we've actually had on it. Now, I know there will be some major concerns. I know with the KACP, I'm sure the KSA on this will have to weigh in as well. This is just preliminary. This is something we could talk about putting in the long-term report, not short-term, because it's just the beginning. Because it'll also go down. What we're starting to discuss is the downward departures as well. And again, that's nothing short-term. That's something we have to work on long-term. Going back to questions, number 5 is just please include any other proportionality concerns. We want their opinions also besides just the questions that we're asking them. It's only going to run for 3 days. And we figure if they don't answer them within those 3 days, they're going to be lost in their emails anyway. And we'll just be wasting time. But Scott assures me he thinks they could have it put together and out yet this week. And by our next meeting, we'll have it all compiled and hope to be able to report on that as well. On the presentation that DA Branson gave us, their whole, his thought process is the recidivism rates and then taking a look at lessening jail times. You can get more jail time with a simple DUI, your mandatory weekend, than you can with possession, of a marijuana. And we know that comes from years ago with Mothers Against Drunk Driving having a very loud voice in the legislature of creating the DUI laws. But it's time that we figure something out. But again, this is something that the KSA and Kansas Chiefs are both going to have to weigh in on and talk about before we decide what we're going to do with that. That's not our top priority. Our top priority is still getting the proportionality for the felonies figured out. And we should have all that ready for the September 24th. So any questions or anything?
Any questions for Chief Ackerman?
This is Sheriff Carr. This is directed to Chairman Bennett.
Sure.
To help them in getting their survey out, would you happen to have a list of like local bar association contacts to maybe help spread the word to get the survey quicker?
I can tell you, I can answer that for you, Chairman. He's already got the list of I have to write them down here, of the defense attorneys and the prosecuting attorneys for the state, both. And I forgot, we said one other thing. He's got all the attorneys and the KSA and the KCP all covered, all in the same thing, Bill.
Okay, good. I'm gonna say not every defense attorney is a member of the Defense Attorney Association, not every prosecutor is a member of the Prosecutor Association, but you're going to get the lion's share of both with those listservs, I would think. So
I think so. And that's what Scott's main concern was as well, that we make sure we get the biggest bang for our buck when we send them out.
Yep. All right. Very good. Any other questions for Chief? One thing you said there just jumped out at me as we're going through all of these, and that is most of us are an appointee on behalf of some organization. I'm for the Kansas District Attorney Association, the Chiefs of Police, etc. And as recommendations come in from the various subcommittees, obviously we set a date so that we can have it in some advance, so we have as much time to discuss in October and November as possible, because I suspect there's going to be a lot for us to go through. And while these meetings have been fairly short, these Zoom meetings, I don't have any reason to believe we're going to have short meetings in October and November. I think this is going to take every bit of 4 or 5 hours to wade through. And as soon as we can get through everything just in 2 meetings. One thing I'm just going to point out is it seems like the sooner we can get stuff, the better, because, I don't know about everybody, but I suspect I'm going to want to at least talk to my board of directors and say, here's where I'm at. Make sure I'm speaking, because what I don't want to do is do something and have my associate come in and be, not supportive of it in the legislature or chief or anyone else for that matter. So the sooner we can get at least a thumbprint of what things are going to look like, it'll be easier for those of us who represent some entity to go back and at least touch base with them and make sure they know what's coming. So just an observation.
Just Chief Ackman, I would agree with you on that. I know we usually meet every September for the chiefs. Thing is, with COVID, our conference was canceled, but I can call for a board meeting to make sure everything is online with us as well as Sheriff Carr can as well with his organization. But I would think by the end of this month alone, we could have all the survey results and redo the short-term, long-term goals ready to go to be pre-looked at way before the meeting that takes us several hours. We'll have that ready for you.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? If not, we will go to Data Management Subcommittee, which is Jennifer Basinger. I know she was going to be tied up this week, and I think as has long been the case now, she's waiting for the post audit to see if they can get some sense of what RMS systems are available statewide. Just for the listeners, what we're talking about is she's the chairperson of the subcommittee that's looking into records management systems across the state and how to gain efficiencies across the state and by making certain recommendations regarding legislation. The problem that subcommittee had early on was trying to design, decide, understand what records management systems are actually utilized by law enforcement agencies, probation, parole, everything, every entity that touches the criminal justice system, and trying to figure out, what all's out there. That was the problem they've had. So I don't think there's anything new to report, but that's the situation, the ongoing situation with the Data Management Subcommittee. That leads us to Reentry Subcommittee. I believe is that Representative Finney?
Chairman
Nope.
Bennett, it's Jean Phillips with the University of Kansas. Representative Finney and I have been kind of co-chairing this, and I prepared the report for this. After our June meeting, Representative Finney and I agreed to sort of have a little working group where we would talk about education and employment. And so we had a conversation on July 21st with Council of State Governments, and we had they did a report for us about what their process would be in terms of helping us with housing issues and with maybe and employment issues. Those were sort of the two things that came out of that conversation. As a result, we had a follow-up meeting with the committee that took place on August 4th. Unfortunately, we didn't have a quorum. We had a couple of members that were ill, but we went ahead and had a committee and meeting. Council of State Governments presented to our committee, and there were a couple of things that they did. One was a presentation on education and employment and sort of their assessment plan. And they had some key questions that they were going to try and answer about how Kansas coordinates their system of services for employment. How does that align with the research and the best practices in the area of training and employment for folks who have been released? And also trying to look at the impact of the 2018 occupational licensing law. The commission may remember that one of the things we were talking about in this subcommittee was collateral consequences and how those collateral consequences were impacting the ability of individuals to get employment. And so one of the things that Council of State Government is going to do is look not only at just collateral consequences, but if there's any impact of that 2018 law on occupational licensing. So there were a number of stakeholders that the Council of State Government is going to look at, including community college, business leaders, Chamber of Commerce. We had a member of Chamber of Commerce that was in on our reentry subcommittee meeting and offered to provide some assistance. So there is a variety of folks. They're also going to reach out to a few licensing boards and see what they can come up with. And they also are looking into housing. So Margie Phelps with Kansas Department of Corrections was also on that subcommittee call. And Margie has been instrumental in helping us and helping the Council of State Governments figure out what needs to happen in terms of housing for reentry. We've sort of narrowed it, not really narrowed it, but there are 3 areas that, at least from DOC's perspective, and that is to increase the number of master leases. They need more housing specialists, especially since those specialists are the folks who work with the individual housing authorities to try and get individuals, federal housing, and then the need for potentially a forensic unit to deal with folks who are elderly or have special needs, substance abuse, mental health issues. Council of State Governments also presented a list of stakeholders that they had identified that they were going to try to reach out to. And it sounds like some of this may be the same information that Representative Owens had from his subcommittee, or perhaps that Shelley had in the subcommittee or the working group that she's doing on supervision. So based on their conversation with us, we have basically 2 dates, September 8th and October 5th. They're going to report back. Those weeks are the weeks before our commission meeting. They will report back to our subcommittee. We will prepare reports then to give to our to the commission. And our goal here is to have something by mid-October that we can have sort of pulled together based upon their recommendations that we can present to the full commission. I also want to make sure that we don't forget that we are also talking sort of the last, another part of the legs of our stool, which is the employment and the housing. The other one is the fines and fees issue and the debt that individuals face. We've mentioned this before, we will present those driver's license issues again to the legislature. The other issue that we've talked about is collections. And so we're going to look to see what we can do in terms of collections and whether or not there's a way to perhaps have some sort of a tolling while individuals are incarcerated so that collections don't continue to increase on them. That was my assignment for our subcommittee. And I have reached out to Kansas Appleseed and I've reached out to the ACLU, both of whom have done some work on collections. And I'm trying to pull some information together from those two organizations and see if we can't come up with something to try and ease the burden on some of these individuals in terms of fines and fees. So that's kind of where we are. We did not have a quorum, as I said, so we didn't really have an opportunity to vote on setting long-term and short-term goals. I'm hoping to have another committee meeting, like in about 3 weeks, to try and get some of those things nailed down so we can present that at the next commission meeting. You're on mute, Mark. Chairman Bennett, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. I'm not used to this sometimes, still make mistakes. It's easy to do. Couple things on the housing issues that you identified, the master leases, housing specialist, forensic unit, et cetera. That, I guess I'm stating the obvious here, but I'd encourage Ms. Phelps or anyone else who's helping on this, the more specific we can get in terms of recommendations in the legislature. I'm not sure that that's going to take a change to legislation. Maybe more of, sounds almost like a line items in a budget presentation or a budget request on behalf of DOC. I don't know, but whether that, whichever it is, I guess the more specific we can get, because I think we want to make this as turnkey as possible for the legislature. The other thing has to do with collections and trying to ease the burden on folks who, especially while they're incarcerated, it's impossible for them to make payments, at least anything substantive, and then nickel and dime them, I suppose, a little bit here and there from whatever work they might be able to get paid for during their incarceration, which won't be much. But I'd also encourage you to reach out to, I think what's Association of Counties and that sort of thing. Make sure we know what any pushback might be, because obviously when you start interrupting the stream of revenue,
Right.
I'd rather find out what those concerns are up front so we can address them in whatever we propose to the legislature than have them arrive at the legislature and have the whole thing derail. So.
Right. So on my list of things that I need to do, and I told the subcommittee I would work on this, is to reach out and contact the different judicial districts, to contact folks and find out how they have them set up, how that's going to impact them financially, and I will try to figure that out in the next few weeks here and see what we can come up with for the next meeting.
Very good. Anyone else have questions for the professor regarding the reentry subcommittee?
Mr. Chairman, Sheriff Carr.
Go ahead.
Professor Phillips, have you identified stakeholders in the federal government with the housing issues as well?
Well, yeah, so through HUD, there are some issues that we are trying to work through, which is one of the we can't really do anything in terms of statutorily, right? We can't change what the federal government has set up for their housing authorities through HUD. But one of the issues that, as I understand it, and folks can correct me if I'm wrong, maybe Patrick may have a different take on this, but my understanding is that what we're trying to do is through those housing specialists, they're able to reach out to those local housing authorities and try to work through them to try and say, we've got someone here, we know this is the situation, and on an individual basis, try to get those folks housing. And so we're trying to figure out if there's not a way that we can either expand the number of specialists so that we can get access. But how federal housing is going to be a harder nut for us to crack, I think. Especially when they have restrictions on if you have drug crimes, drug felonies, whether or not you can get into federal housing. That makes it a harder sell.
Okay. Secondly, I know I was part of one of your discussions about some of the collections. I did find out here in our judicial district, we have a district court trustee.
Right.
So I might direct you to reach out to our administrative district judge, Laura Lewis.
Oh, I know her.
She's got some statutes, I believe, readily available might be able to give you some guidance.
Okay.
A little bit of schooling that I received from her here recently on some issues, so might help you out.
All right. Thanks, Sheriff.
Okay.
Any other questions for Professor Phillips?
Chairman, Bill Persinger and Topeka from below.
Yes, sir.
Professor Phillips, pretty sure I'm preaching to the choir on this, but you know, and I think most of us do so much of reentry and reintegration, you know, all those things to help folks prepare. You know, a lot of that gets down to housing and employment and that kind of thing. And that does form quite a few of the recommendations that we find in those documents I referenced earlier, and is, you know, also part of the conversations we've had in Representative Owens's committee as well. So housing and employment are so essential to recovery from mental health and substance abuse. And I know that you folks know that. I just want to say it for the record, I can see a lot of your work applying to the work that Representative Owens is overseeing.
Yeah, so I agree. I actually tried to make it to the 24th of July, whatever that last subcommittee was, and I just had a conflict. But my intention is to be at the next meeting because I've noticed that the issues that your subcommittee or that Representative Owens' subcommittee is talking about, it's going to overlay a lot of what we're talking about.
Well, thank you. I sure appreciate that. Just speaking for me as an individual member of that subcommittee, and again, you know, housing and employment, some of the other services that, you know, are so essential to reentry and recovery exist in the community. And so there's some plans that have been made, but I think we sure have an opportunity here, all of us collectively, to carry that piece of it forward. And thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Any other questions, comments with regard to reentry? And also want to make sure I specifically ask Representative Finney, you're on the call, and I know you've worked with, sort of handed off this to Professor Phillips, but I want to make sure I give you a chance to say anything else if you wanted to, Gail.
No, I don't have anything additional. I thought Professor Phillips did a wonderful job of explaining what we're working on, and thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, Chairman Bennett. I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Yes, go ahead and state your, I don't think you were on the initial roll call. Reverend, why don't you go ahead and state your name for the...
I'm running around. I apologize for being late. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for the work that you're doing. Really appreciate it, especially with the impact it could possibly have here in Wyandotte County. So with what we just went through with our elections and getting our DA back, let me ask you this question. What would be the best way of really getting this process started here if it hasn't already started about the reentry program and things like that? So I'm learning all this stuff. So who would it be, through the DA's office, or how should we go about getting more information on that?
Well, make sure I understand your question. You want to know in terms of improving reentry services in Wyandotte County specifically, how do you go about it?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Obviously, I'd never discourage anyone from reaching out to their local DA. Marcus, I'm sure, could give you his 2 cents on it, but this is reentry is really under the purview of the district court. The DA, the judges of the district court lose jurisdiction once somebody goes to the DOC. So when they're coming out, when we're talking about reentry, I think most of us are typically talking about reentry into the community after serving in the Department of Corrections as opposed to a local jail. Although you could have both conversations, but if you're talking about specifically coming out of the DOC, it's a conversation for, well, for this subcommittee, number one, you talk to Professor Phillips and the members there. The other thing, though, is Secretary Zamuda, it's going to be a DOC specific discussion on the kind of programs they offer and try to plug people into. Now, if you're talking about reentry coming out of jail in the local jail and someone's been in custody for serving a local sentence or, maybe it's a probation violation, that's a little different conversation. But those are the two, nutshell, the two basic scenarios that I think you're addressing there. Does that help?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Bennett. Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Thank you so much.
Yeah, very good. Anyone else want to add to that? Okay. I think then that leaves us with the last subcommittee, which is the relatively newly formed Race and the Criminal Justice System Subcommittee. We met, I think, June 30th, and essentially what that meeting was an opportunity for us to identify potential members. An email has gone out notifying everybody who was on the call, and we're making our best efforts to send notification to the people who were nominated, I guess, to be members of this new subcommittee, so that they know that we're having our second formal meeting this coming Thursday, I believe it is, and over the lunch hour. Yep. So 12 to 1:30 is the second meeting of the Criminal Justice System, Race and the Criminal Justice System Subcommittee, and all the everyone who obviously everyone's invited, but anyone who was on the first call, plus the appointees that we identified will or should be shortly getting notice of that hearing, or have already gotten notice of that hearing. And the next steps are to identify some goals. Granted, it's a very quick turnaround before the final vote, or final report rather, due in December. But we want to take advantage of this opportunity, even if it's a few months worth of meetings. We still think there's some substantive good that can come out of such a subcommittee. And so I think it's an important next step. So, but obviously nothing substantive other than just identifying people. And if you're interested, before I start rattling off names, we got to make sure everybody can do it who was nominated. But I think by this Thursday, we'll know who's got the time to do it, who's going to agree. And so tune in Thursday for the subcommittee. So that leads us to any questions. I guess I should open myself up for any questions on the Race and the Criminal Justice System Subcommittee. Anyone have any questions for me, or other members who were on that call? Okay. So on the agenda, we're moving about 30 minutes ahead of time. So rather than take a break, although I'll open it up, does anybody need a break? If not, we can try to move toward the conclusion of today's meeting. No one's weighing in, so I'll assume we're ready to keep going. The discussion next was for the goals for the December 2020 final report. We've talked about this quite a bit over the last several months. I would say today was probably as good a recitation of the specific efforts being made by the various subcommittees. All the various chairpersons of the various subcommittees were pretty specific. Even in general terms, they were specific about what the goals are of their subcommittees. We've had standing discussion that if anybody needs something specifically, they'd let us know. I think Patrick Armstrong and the folks, his organization, have been helping out significantly in terms of providing information. Doesn't sound like anyone, while various, surveys and things sometimes are answered better than others. It does seem as though I'll say it this way, I've not heard from any subcommittees that they're being stonewalled or failing in some fashion to get access to the information they need. It's slowly coming in. Obviously, it's a very difficult time to interact given COVID and how many folks are working from home and how many offices are short-staffed. But it seems like we are getting the information we need to the subcommittee so they can make decisions. I'll say one other thing, and I'll open up for discussion, and that is, in 2019, when we started meeting in August, we made very quick work and quickly identified the idea that it was going to be very difficult to make substantive, systemic recommendations to the criminal justice system in such a short turnaround in time for the December 119 initial interim report. And so what we did instead was identify issues. What could we want to do? What was what we called the low-hanging fruit, things that we knew we could get consensus on and submit to the legislature. And the plan was to have more substantive heavy lifts take place during this year. One other thing I guess I'd point out at this point, and I think we've mentioned it maybe in the last, maybe it was the Diversion Specialty Court Subcommittee I met with last week. But one point I want to make, I'm not going to discourage anybody, but I think it's something we need to be aware of, is that obviously finances are going to play a role in what the legislature can and cannot do. The deficits to revenue streams, given the COVID, given what it's done to the economy, may be limiting, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't, shoot for the bleachers. We should still try to identify our goals, but maybe as we are planning to put things together, have some concession to the fact that funding is going to be a part of this. But I'm just looking at Professor Phillips and thinking of her presentation about the need for what sounds like more funding for DOC for these master leases and housing specialists and those sort of things. And that may be a wish list for a year or two out, but that doesn't mean we should, we still need to put it in there. We need to be realistic. But I guess what I'm getting at is I can see, as the chair of the commission, I'm going to, in October, November, be asking people, all right, what do we really, really want to achieve with this? What's 2020's low hanging fruit, so to speak, or what's 2020's must haves that are more important than others that may or may not be impacted. So just something I wanted to point out as we're formulating things, putting pencil to paper before we put pen to paper. I think we just have to be aware of finances. So Professor Phillips, I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, Chairman Bennett, thank you. This is Jean Phillips from the University of Kansas. So as we're thinking about as a subcommittee with establishing short-term and long-term goals, I assume what we would be thinking is that the short-term goals would be our low-hanging fruit or things that we think we can actually get accomplished. But those long-term goals, I would still plan to put, like, in the future, we need to think about these things, even though maybe we can't afford them right now, right? We still need to put those in our long-term goal plan, right?
That would absolutely be my preference. I don't see any reason to hide good ideas just because there's not money for it.
Okay.
But I guess I just point out, as people are putting stuff together, let's be mindful that what ought to happen and what can happen may be two different things, but let's compartmentalize them, identify them both, but let's make sure it's all there. I just, again, wanted to point out that finances are going to impact what we can do. So that's really the point I was making.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, this is Haley. This is David Haley again. Last year I was very appreciative, and also one of the previous subcommittee reports today, where we still talk about changing the classification of certain possession crimes. That is a perennial subject that's come up, especially at least marijuana. This is an ask that we should have, not knowing what the makeup of the legislature is going to be come January, if there's, which way it's going to go. But I think philosophically, we identified it last year, and certainly to re-identify it and to have the continuity of the consistency of that low-hanging fruit, if you will, because it is clogging, us, our bed space unnecessarily, some would argue, I would say. And I would hope that we would continue to espouse philosophically where it just works all around for criminal justice reform, that the reclassification and even the prosecution of some of these possession crimes would be reevaluated.
Okay, understood. Those are the kind of things that are not particularly, cost prohibitive, readjusting levels and things like that. So that strikes me as something that, whether we all agree on it conceptually or not, it's not going to have much of a price tag. So that's going to be at least one hurdle that we can avoid going in. So, yep. Any other comments in terms of, I didn't want to derail or get off on a tangent here when we talk about money, but just, again, just kind of stating the obvious. But in terms of the discussion of goals for the December 2020 final report, anything that Someone wanted to opine about, comment on, add to, the floor is yours.
Chairman, this is Spence Cohen.
Yes, sir.
And we talked about it in our meeting last week that you were a part of, and I know Jordan was also a part of it. I still would like to see, especially with my committee that's got several different working groups, that we have a kind of a format to follow when we're making our recommendations to submit. So I just wanted to throw that out and see if that's still a possibility.
I've forgotten that discussion. Thanks for reminding me, Spence. Yeah. This came up last fall as well when we were putting our final reports together. Just is there a format, literally, a Word document, or is there a way these subcommittee reports should look? The working group reports to the subcommittee should look. And I think Jordan said he would try to get something out that's at least a template. Doesn't have to be, no one's going to get fined for margins being different or font being different, but that way at least there's some utility or some uniformity as to the way it looks. So that legislators, who are going to take the time to wade through all of this, know what it is they're looking at and see something consistent in terms of the presentation. So that's a good point, Jordan, if you wouldn't mind. Again, it's not a rule or something like that, but it's some guidance for folks. If you could send something out in the next couple of weeks, I appreciate it. Any other discussion or comments about goals for the 2020 final report?
This Chief Ackerman.
Yes,
I
sir.
take it the look of it's going to be pretty much close to the same as it was the first report, except we're going to make some tweaks to it, obviously.
Sure.
Talking to Senator Wilborn the other day, he was on our call with us, that our low-hanging fruit, several of our stuff made it to the floor, but died because of COVID when they just killed the session. And I think that's what's going to happen this year, is we're going to bring that same low-hanging fruit, but these other things that we talked about for the proportionality will be the long term. But we plan on keeping a lot of the short term the same for 2020 or 2021, I guess, as we did for 2020. So.
Yeah, I can see too, there may even be a few extra pieces of fruit in that low-hanging fruit bushel as well. There may be things that are identified as really not all that controversial. You just didn't have time to get to in 19. So it may be a longer list of low-hanging fruit, and then, some that might require a step ladder and some that might require a boom truck. So we'll just.
When we were talking downward departures, I'm quite certain there's going to be a lot of input on that.
I bet. Okay. Other comments? So I don't want to shortchange us here by not giving enough time for discussion. Anyone else have anything else to add?
Chairman, this is Jim Phillips from KU, Chairman. I just had a point of clarification. Are we still shooting for, I just want to make sure I have this in my head right, like a draft of our subcommittee reports for the October meeting and then a final for our November meeting so that it can all get finalized by December? Is that where we're still at?
Yeah, let's put it this way. The sooner we can put some draft together, the better, because my intention is, instead of having, the last several months, what we've done is give these reports from the various subcommittees, and we're done. It's 2:35, and here we're going to wrap up in a few minutes. It's about a 1-hour meeting. The reality is, let's assume if we wait until November to have one big meeting and cover everything everyone's done, I just don't know there's enough time for that. So the sooner we can get, if there's any subcommittee that says, we're ready to go, we know what we want to discuss, I'll take first come, first serve, and we'll utilize that time in October to start saying, okay, here's what the commission agrees to coming out of the subcommittees. That is something we as a commission endorse as a commission and make that part of our legislative agenda / final report. And so I don't want to set an arbitrary limit that says you have until this, the sooner the better. But if someone does need more time, or can only give, this is 6 out of the 10 things we're going to discuss. We're ready to give that in October, but give us a little time for the other 4. I'm flexible. So be it. We can take it up on the November report, but that way I want to use as much time in October and November to have a fully robust discussion, to see what we have consensus on, and go that route. I will also add, we'll see where things are at, but it would be a hell of a lot easier if we could all be in at least some room together to do that. This Zoom really works pretty well, but in that kind of a meeting, it might be, I don't know. We'll see where it's at. It may be impossible, but it would be nice when we're having those kind of discussions to be in a room where we can all look each other in the eye and see hands raised. But we'll see where it goes. I heard someone else was chiming in.
Chairman.
Bill.
I think I mentioned before, if I didn't, in that, at least the concept of a cost offset. There was been a couple of 3 great studies down there in Sedgwick County, and I think 1 or 2 in Wyandotte County that demonstrated that certain kinds of, mental health programs or whatever can actually save, the hard dollars being spent in other areas, and not so much just a stump for mental health. It's really all I know. But one thing that might ask you to consider when Jordan comes up with that outline, could there be, if it's a column, or if there are a criteria that we each address, if that could include some comment about the potential for cost offset. If we go out and buy, 100 new police cars, which I'd be in favor of, but that's a capital output. That is money spent. That's probably new money. But if we went and built if we installed a mental health court in 2 counties, we might prevent X number of days in the county or the state system. So and we may not be able to put dollar figures to all of these. That does require kind of a scientific approach. They've been using it at Wichita State University, but we could at least have a little check box. Is there potential for cost offset? The cost offset that then being an opportunity to say to, to public policymakers, look, we're spending $1 million on this, but it will save 3 million. And so I'd just be in favor of some kind of analysis of cost offset potential, even if it's only an X or a check mark in a box next to a program or a concept.
Yeah, we discussed this last fall also when we were discussing the presentation of the legislature, that anything that comes with a cost benefit or a cost analysis. Now the Sentencing Commission does that after a session begins with respect to proposed legislation. What's the impact of that, at least on criminal cases or criminal legislation? But you're right, there are certain topics that have already by other entities been assessed. Sedgwick County, Hugo School of Public Policy at Wichita State has done 4 or 5 years in a row now an assessment of the crisis center and the positive impact on both the region and the state as a whole as to the cost avoidance, cost benefit of having that facility here in Wichita. And if something like that is available, by all means, any subcommittee who thinks that is germane to their final analysis should include something like that, because money talks, and especially in times when the legislature is going to be scrambling to try to come up with enough revenue to pay all the bills and handle all of its obligations. Anything we can show them in that respect is going to be well received, I would think. So good point, Bill, and absolutely, I'd encourage everybody to include that. Other thoughts before we wrap things up regarding needs, thoughts, goals for the December 2020 final report? If not, I'll just specifically Representative Owens as the mental health and given your co-chair on this commission. Anything you wanted to add?
Nothing specifically, Mr. Chairman. I think as time draws near, the more information we can get, the sooner the better. Just to reiterate what you were talking about, any recommendations we know our subcommittees are going to put forth, we don't have to have them all together as a subcommittee before we present them. We could do, one here, one there, and combine it. So it's good information.
Very good. Okay, well, I'll get with Jordan. Unless there's anyone else has anything else, I'll get with Jordan and we'll get a new date set. I'll try to keep on this same Monday Monday 1:30 schedule that we're on, and send out the next month's notice and agenda. For those of you on the Race in the Criminal Justice System Subcommittee, I'll see you on Zoom Thursday. And for those of you in the Diversion Working Group, I'll see you either Friday or early next week. Last call. Anybody have anything else they want to add before we wrap things up?
Chairman, I personally would not be opposed to an in-person meeting if distancing could be arranged for, and would be willing to drive anywhere and participate in that. I speak only for myself, though.
Sure. We'll see where we're at in October. We got seems like not that far along, and it's or far away. It's not. But then again, in terms of COVID and what'll happen between now and then, I won't even hazard a guess. So.
I got one thing, Mr. Chairman. This is Todd Ackerman.
Yes,
For the race in the criminal justice system, would we be opposed to having somebody from the Sheriff's Association being on this subcommittee as well? We don't have to from them. And I know I have some chief representatives, but I'd like to have permission to ask for another from the Sheriff's Association, since they deal with between their jails and everything as well. I think they could have some great input.
Yeah, I'll double check. For some reason, I thought we had the chief of Hutch, and then I was thinking we had a sheriff, but maybe I
have the chief from Hutchin, Jeff Hooper, and the chief Michael Oots. I don't have a sheriff's on there.
I'm sorry, I missed that then. Okay.
And if anything, we could have Bill Carr here on it, or appointment from him for somebody from the association, either one.
Well, I do know both you and Sheriff were on the first call, so I think it was sort of assumed that many of us would be on it, but we'd sort of, let's put this, we'd be far more voices in the room with all these additional members. So yeah, let me know if Sheriff Carr is willing to take on that role, and if so, great, or his stand in, and we can go from there. We had that discussion on Thursday specifically, though.
Okay.
Sheriff Carr, I'll look to get somebody to sit on it. I'm a little pressed for time right now.
Understood. Okay, well, if nothing
Mr.
else,
Chair,
yes.
this is Jordan from KLRD. I just wanted to note, I think we had tentatively discussed the date pattern. I think it's looking like September 14th might be the next date for next month.
Very good.
To state that.
Thank you, Jordan. I'd forgotten that. Appreciate it. Okay. Well, everybody have a good afternoon, and we will see. I think actually we'll be seeing, all of us in one form or another, we'll be seeing quite a lot of each other with the upcoming Zoom meetings for the various subcommittees. And if anyone who's not on one of those, or I won't see, I guess I'll see you on September 14th. All right. Thank you, folks. We'll call the, well, I guess we probably should take to be very official here. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Professor Phillips?
So move.
I think that Senator Haley? Yeah, I can't see.
Yes.
Okay, very good. All right. Thanks, folks. Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
You too.
Good night.
Bye-bye.